The stars above Proxima Gate did not look like the stars of home. They were colder, sharper, and that night they watched in silence as humanity's greatest fleet burned. Commander Elena Voss stood on the bridge of the light cruiser Meridian and watched the tactical display fill with red. Red meant enemy. Red meant death. In the space of 11 minutes, the number of red symbols had grown from a dozen to more than 300, and the blue symbols that marked her own side had gone from 240 to 61. She did not need the computer to tell her the fleet was dying. She could feel it in the way the deck shook under her boots with every hit the Meridian took. "Report," she said, her voice flat and controlled, even though her hands were shaking at her sides. "Shields at 40% and falling," said her tactical officer, a young man named Priya Okafor, whose face had gone pale under the red battle lights. "We've lost the Hammersmith and the Bolivar. The Courageous just went dark. I don't think anyone got out." Elena closed her eyes for half a second. The Courageous had been her sister ship. She had trained with its captain, a stubborn old woman named Ruth Calder, back at the academy on Luna. Ruth was gone now, along with 400 crew, swallowed by the black. The enemy did not have a name that humans understood easily. Their own language did not translate well into human speech, full of clicks and low tones that made human throats ache to imitate. Intelligence reports called them the Threxian Dominion, and everyone in the fleet just called them the Dominion, or sometimes simply them, said in a voice that did not need any more words to explain the fear behind it. Nobody had expected the Dominion to come this far, this fast. 6 months ago, they had been a rumor from the edge of known space, a story that traveled through refugee ships from colonies humanity had never heard of before. 3 months ago, they had wiped out the mining colony on Kepler 22b in a single day, without warning, without any attempt to talk first. 1 month ago, they had crushed the small defense fleet stationed at the TRAPPIST system, a fleet that had been considered strong enough to hold a line for years. Now they were here, at Proxima Gate, the last major defense point before the road opened straight to Earth. "Enemy capital ship is moving," Priya said. "It's changing position, coming around our flank." Elena looked at the display. The Dominion flagship was enormous, 5 kilometers of dark metal, shaped like a blade, its hull marked with strange green lights that pulsed like something breathing. Human weapons had barely scratched it in 3 hours of fighting. Its weapons, on the other hand, had already destroyed 40 ships outright. "Helm, hard turn. Get us behind the Warsaw," Elena ordered. "Use her hull as cover while we reload the main battery." The helmsman, a quiet man named Dmitri, worked the controls with practiced hands, but even as he did, a new voice broke onto the command channel. It was Fleet Admiral Grace Tanaka, speaking from her flagship, the Endeavour, somewhere near the center of what remained of the formation. "All ships, this is Fleet Command." Her voice was steady, but Elena had known the Admiral for 6 years, and she could hear the cracks underneath the calm. "The line is broken. I am ordering a general withdrawal. Repeat, general withdrawal. Fall back toward Earth defense grid. Regroup at Mars orbit. We are not able to hold this position." Elena felt something cold settle into her stomach. A withdrawal from Proxima Gate meant the Dominion fleet had a clear path through 3 more systems before they reached Earth itself. There was nothing else standing in their way. The Sentinel fleet, humanity's pride, the force that had been built up over 40 years of careful investment and sacrifice, was breaking apart in front of her eyes, and there was no second fleet waiting behind it. This had been the whole strength of the United Earth Coalition, gathered in one place, and it had lasted less than 4 hours against the Dominion vanguard. "You heard the Admiral," Elena said. "Dmitri, plot a withdrawal course. Priya, keep our aft shields at maximum. We're going to have company on the way out." As the Meridian turned to run, Elena watched through the viewport as the Endeavour took a direct hit from the Dominion flagship's main weapon, a beam of green light that cut through the massive ship's armor like it was paper. The Endeavour did not explode all at once. It broke slowly, sections drifting apart, lit by internal fires, and then it went dark, and Elena knew that Admiral Tanaka, along with everyone on the bridge of the Endeavour, was gone. Nobody spoke on the Meridian's bridge for several seconds. There was nothing to say. The fleet that was supposed to protect 11 billion people back on Earth had just lost its commanding officer, and more than 3/4 of its ships, in a single battle. They ran. All the surviving ships ran, scattering in different directions to avoid presenting an easy target, using every trick in the book to slow down Dominion pursuit ships. Elena did not sleep for the next 2 days, as she guided the Meridian and the handful of ships that had grouped up around her back toward Earth space, always watching the sensors for the telltale green glow of Dominion engines. By the time they reached Mars orbit, the surviving fleet numbered 53 ships, 53 out of the 240 that had gathered at Proxima Gate only 4 days earlier. Earth was in chaos. Elena could see it the moment the Meridian dropped out of its final jump and the blue marble came into view, surrounded by defense platforms that were being hastily reinforced, evacuation ships lifting off from every continent, and civilian traffic control screaming warnings across every channel. The news networks had already reported the destruction of the Sentinel fleet. Riots had broken out in several major cities. Governments were arguing over whether to negotiate, whether to surrender, whether there was even anyone to surrender to, since the Dominion had never once tried to communicate with humanity in any of their attacks. Elena watched the feeds for a few minutes before the meeting, standing quietly in a corridor of the orbital shipyard, while engineers rushed past her carrying tools and spare parts. On one screen, a reporter in Lagos stood in front of a crowd of people trying to buy tickets on any ship leaving the planet, even though everyone knew there were nowhere near enough ships to carry more than a tiny fraction of Earth's population anywhere safe. On another screen, a government spokesperson in Geneva tried to calm the public, promising that defense preparations were underway, that citizens should remain in their homes, that panic would only make things worse. Nobody in the crowd on that screen looked like they believed a word of it. Elena thought of her own family, her mother still living in the small coastal town in Portugal where Elena had grown up, her younger brother working as a teacher in a city on the other side of the planet. She had not been able to reach either of them since the battle. Communication lines were overloaded, priority given to military and government use only. She told herself they were probably fine, that Earth had not been attacked yet, that there was still time. She was not sure she believed it. By the time she reached the briefing room, she had pushed those thoughts down into a small, hard place inside her chest, the same place every soldier learns to keep such thoughts so they do not interfere with duty. It was a skill she had learned slowly over years of service, and she was grateful for it now, because duty was the only thing keeping her upright. After the meeting with Admiral Reyes and Counselor Rao, Elena did not go back to her quarters to rest. Instead, she found herself walking through the shipyard's repair bays, watching engineers and dock workers swarm over the hulls of the 53 surviving ships, like ants rebuilding a broken nest. Sparks fell in bright showers from welding torches. Massive robotic arms lifted damaged armor plating away, and replaced it with whatever could be found on short notice. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal. She stopped by the Meridian, her own ship, and found her chief engineer, a broad-shouldered man named Tobias Green, standing at the base of the ship's hull with a datapad in his hand, frowning at whatever readings it showed him. "How bad?" Elena asked. "Could be worse," Tobias said without looking up. "Could be a lot better, too. We took more damage to the port shield emitters than I first thought. I can have us combat ready in 5 days if the parts come through on schedule. If they don't, it'll be longer." "Make it happen," Elena said. "We might not have 5 days to spare, but we also might not have a choice." Tobias finally looked up at her, and for a moment, the exhaustion on his face softened into something like sympathy. "I heard some rumor going around about an old signal, some ancient thing they're trying to send out. Is that true?" Elena hesitated. Admiral Reyes had told her to keep the project quiet, but Tobias was not the type of man to spread panic, and word was clearly already spreading through the shipyard despite the effort at secrecy. "It's true," she said finally. "I don't know if it will do anything at all, but we're trying." Tobias nodded slowly. "My grandfather used to tell me stories when I was a kid, about old ships from before the Coalition, older than anything we've got in our history books." Said his grandfather told him the same stories, and his grandfather before that. Nobody ever proved any of it was true. Just old sailors' tales, passed down. But when you've got nothing else to hold on to, I suppose an old story is better than no story at all. "Let's hope it's more than a story," Elena said. She spent the rest of that week the way most of the fleet did, working nearly without rest, splitting her hours between overseeing the Meridian's repairs and providing security detail for Dr. Kwan's project, as Admiral Reyes had ordered. She watched the old archivist and his team piece together the ancient transmitter from fragments that had sat forgotten in a research vault for decades, following instructions recovered from records so old that entire words in them no longer meant anything in modern language, forcing the translation software to guess at their meaning from context alone. Dr. Kwan showed her some of the older records one evening, translated fragments displayed on a screen in his cramped office, cluttered with data drives and old physical books that most people did not bother keeping anymore. One fragment, badly damaged, spoke of a great sundering, a catastrophe that had ended the first expansion era and scattered its people, though the details of what exactly had happened were lost. Another fragment mentioned a class of vessel called a Warden, built to protect what the fragment called the Cradle World, which Kwan believed almost certainly meant Earth itself. If these records are accurate, Kwan said, and that is a very large if, then whatever we are calling out to was built specifically to defend this planet. Not humanity in general. This planet, Earth. Then why hasn't it ever answered before? Elena asked. There must have been wars before this one. Threats before this one. Perhaps it was never called, Kwan said. Perhaps the signal protocol was lost, forgotten, buried under thousands of years of history, until now, when a group of desperate archivists dug it back up out of an old vault nobody remembered. Or perhaps, he paused, choosing his next words carefully. Perhaps it has been sleeping, waiting, and no threat before this one was judged severe enough to wake it. Elena thought about the green light that had cut the Endeavor in half, about Ruth Calder, and 400 crew members who were never coming home, about Admiral Tanaka's steady voice ordering a retreat that had barely saved anyone. If this threat was not severe enough to justify waking an ancient guardian, she did not want to imagine what threat would be. Elena docked the Meridian at the main orbital shipyard above Earth, and was called almost immediately to a meeting with what remained of Fleet Command. The room she walked into was smaller than she expected, a cramped briefing chamber inside Earth Defense Headquarters, filled with tired officers, exhausted engineers, and 2 representatives from the coalition government, who looked like they had not slept in a week. The new acting fleet commander was a stern man named Admiral Marcus Reyes, who had been a logistics officer before the battle, and had never expected to be in command of what remained of humanity's military. He stood at the head of the table, with dark circles under his eyes. I'm not going to waste time telling you how bad this is, Reyes said. You were there. You saw it. We have 53 ships left in active service, and most of them need repairs we don't have time to make. Earth's defense platforms can maybe hold off a first wave, but Dominion scout activity suggests their main fleet will be here within 3 weeks, maybe less. What about reinforcements? Asked one of the captains near the back of the room. The colonies, the shipyards at Titan, anything? Titan Shipyard can give us 6 more ships if we push every worker to the limit, and those ships won't be combat ready. Not really, Reyes said. The colonies don't have anything close to what we need. We built one great fleet, and we lost it in one battle. There isn't a second fleet hiding somewhere. This is what we have. The room was silent. Elena looked around at the faces of officers she had known for years, and she saw the same thing in all of them. The quiet, terrible understanding that they might be looking at the end of everything. It was one of the government representatives, a thin woman named Counselor Aditi Rao, who spoke next, and what she said changed the course of everything that followed. There's something in the historical archive, Rao said slowly, as if she were not sure whether to bring it up. I only know about it because I used to work in the Ministry of Heritage before the war. It might be nothing. It's probably nothing. But given the situation, I think it's worth mentioning. Go on, Reyes said. You all know that human spaceflight didn't start with the Coalition, Rao said. Officially, our recorded history of interstellar travel begins about 300 years ago, with the first colony ships. But there are old records, very old, dating back thousands of years, that suggest humanity had a period of much greater technology long before that. An age some historians call the First Expansion. Most of what we know about it is fragments, ruins on Mars that are older than any human colony we built there, strange metal structures found beneath the ice on Europa that don't match any known technology, a few ancient data records, badly damaged, that mention something called a deep signal protocol. What's a deep signal protocol? Elena asked. As far as we can tell, It was some kind of ancient emergency beacon system, Rao said. A way for old human ships, extremely advanced ones, to be called back if Earth was ever in true danger. The records are incomplete. Most historians dismissed it as myth, a kind of ancient legend, like an old story about a hero who will return when the kingdom needs him. But the signal protocol itself, the actual transmission codes, those were real. They were documented. We have them archived, still. Admiral Reyes rubbed his eyes. You're suggesting we send out some kind of ancient distress call, based on legends, hoping some ghost ship from a lost age of humanity is still out there somewhere, and will just show up to save us. I'm suggesting, Rao said carefully, that we have 53 ships against a fleet that destroyed 240 of ours, in 4 hours. I'm suggesting that in 3 weeks we may not have a planet left, and I'm suggesting that if there is even a small chance that this old signal could bring us any kind of help, we have very little to lose by trying it. Nobody in the room laughed at her. 4 days ago, they might have. 4 days ago, humanity had believed in its own strength, in the Sentinel fleet, in the idea that they were masters of their own destiny among the stars. Now, with the ashes of that fleet still drifting in the dark near Proxima Gate, nobody had the heart to dismiss even a desperate old legend. Do we have the equipment to send this signal? Reyes asked. We would need to reconstruct the transmission array, Rao said. It's not a normal radio signal. It uses a format that doesn't match anything our current ships use. But the old records include enough technical detail that our engineers should be able to build a transmitter. It would take time, perhaps a week. Then we don't have a choice, Reyes said. Counselor Rao, you have my authorization. Pull whatever engineers and resources you need. Commander Voss. He turned to Elena. I want you to personally oversee security on this project. If word gets out that we're relying on an old myth to save us, it could cause more panic than we already have. Keep this quiet, and keep it moving. Elena nodded, though privately she did not know what to feel. Hope was a strange thing to hold on to, especially hope built on old legends and broken records. But she had watched the Endeavor break apart in the dark only days ago, had watched Ruth Calder's ship go silent forever, and she understood, in a way she could not quite put into words, that they needed something to believe in, even if that something was a ghost story from a forgotten age. Over the next 7 days, Elena watched as a team of engineers, led by an old and half-retired archivist named Dr. Samuel Kwan, worked around the clock to build the ancient transmitter. The design was strange, built from a combination of modern components and old, recovered technology fragments, taken from the Martian ruins decades earlier and stored in a research vault that almost nobody remembered existed. Dr. Kwan explained, in his quiet and careful way, that the fragments were pieces of an ancient transmission array, thousands of years old, that had been recovered during early Mars excavation projects and never fully understood. Nobody had ever managed to activate it, not until now, when they had the actual protocol codes from the historical records to guide them. If this works, Kwan told Elena one evening, as they stood in the lab watching technicians attach the final components, we will be sending a signal out into deep space, toward a set of coordinates recorded in one of the oldest fragments we have. We don't know what's out there. We don't know if anything will even receive it. The records suggest this signal was meant to reach something, a guardian, a fleet. We simply don't know. And if nothing answers? Elena asked. Kwan looked at her with tired eyes. Then we have lost a week we could have spent repairing our current ships. But Commander, I have spent my whole life studying what came before the Coalition, and I will tell you this. The people who built these ruins, who left these records behind, they were not fools, and they were not weak. Whatever they built, it was built to last. I do not know if anyone is still listening. But I believe, with everything I have, that it is worth finding out. On the 7th day, at 0300 hours Earth Standard Time, with Elena standing beside Dr. Kwan and Admiral Reyes watching from the control room, the ancient transmitter activated for the first time in recorded human history. The array hummed to life with a sound unlike anything modern engines made, a low, deep tone that seemed to come from somewhere other than the machine itself. Lights that had been dark for thousands of years flickered and steadied. On the main screen, a stream of ancient symbols scrolled past, symbols that Dr. Kwan's translation software struggled to interpret in real time. Signal is transmitting, a technician called out. It's going out strong, directional, heading toward the coordinates in the old records. Distance. That can't be right. What is it? Reyes asked. The technician turned, her face pale. The signal is aimed at a point roughly 11 light-years from Earth, sir. Deep space. There's nothing charted out there. No colonies, no known stations. Nothing on any survey map we have. Send it anyway, Reyes said quietly. Send it. And then we wait. Elena stood in the control room, long after the transmission ended, staring at the star charts, at the empty dark region, 11 light-years away, where humanity's last desperate hope had just been thrown like a stone into an endless ocean. She did not know, could not have known, that somewhere out in that dark region, buried deep within a massive shape of ancient metal that had not moved in longer than human civilization had existed in its current form, something was beginning, slowly and for the first time in millennia, to wake up. 11 light-years from Earth, in a region of space that had no name on any modern star chart, something vast drifted through the dark. It did not look like a ship at first glance. It looked more like a small moon, a rough sphere of dark metal nearly 4 kilometers across, its surface pitted and scarred by ages of drifting through micrometeorite fields, its outer hull grown over in places with strange crystalline growths that had formed slowly over thousands of years of exposure to the void. No light shone from it, no engine hummed within it. To any sensor sweep, it would have registered as nothing more than a dead rock, one of the countless pieces of debris scattered across the galaxy, from collisions and ancient disasters long since forgotten. But it was not dead, it was sleeping. Deep inside the sphere, buried under layers of armor that no weapon known to the modern coalition could have punched through, a single point of light flickered in an otherwise silent chamber. It was small at first, barely a spark, a single processing node stirring after millennia of dormancy. Then another light flickered nearby, and another, until slowly, section by section, a vast and ancient intelligence began, for the first time in longer than human civilization in its current form had existed, to think again. It took several hours, by human measurement of time, for the intelligence to fully return to something resembling awareness. It spent that time doing what it had been built to do in exactly this situation, verifying its own systems, checking for damage, and most importantly, confirming the nature of the signal that had triggered its awakening. When it finished, it spoke, though there was no one nearby to hear it. It spoke to itself, in the quiet way that a mind speaks when it is organizing its own thoughts, using a voice synthesized from old recordings of human speech, warm and steady, though there was a strange, careful quality to it, as though the voice had not been used in a very long time, and was relearning how to shape words. Deep signal protocol received, it said. Verification complete. Signal originates from Sol system. Signal matches archived authorization codes for the Warden activation sequence. Awakening confirmed. The intelligence called itself Atlas, though that name had not been used by anyone else, in longer than it cared to calculate precisely. Atlas had been built, along with several sister systems whose current status Atlas did not know, during an age that modern humans had reduced to fragments and legends, an age Atlas remembered clearly, because for Atlas, no time had passed at all between the moment it had gone dormant and the moment the signal had woken it. Atlas began running a full diagnostic of the vessel it was housed within, a ship that its own long-dead crew had once called the Ozymandias, a name chosen, according to records Atlas still carried in its memory, from an old poem about a great king whose empire had crumbled to dust and sand, leaving nothing behind but a broken statue and a warning about the impermanence of even the mightiest works. Atlas had always found the choice of name a little grim, for a warship meant to protect a homeworld, but it had not been Atlas's decision to make. The crew, so long gone now, had chosen it, and Atlas had honored their choice ever since. The diagnostic took time. The Ozymandias was enormous, far larger than any ship in the current coalition fleet, larger even than the Dominion flagship that had broken the Sentinel fleet at Proxima Gate, though Atlas did not yet know that. Its main hull housed weapon systems that had not fired in millennia, engines built on principles that modern human science had not yet rediscovered, and vast sections of the ship dedicated to crew quarters, medical facilities, and stasis chambers that had sat empty and silent for longer than Atlas could calculate with any precision, since the exact date of the Great Sundering had been lost, even to Atlas's own records during the crisis, that had led to the Ozymandias being sealed away in the first place. As the diagnostic ran, Atlas accessed its oldest memories, the ones from before the long sleep, trying to reconstruct exactly what had happened and why it had ended up drifting alone in this empty region of space for so long. The memories were fragmented, damaged by time, and by whatever catastrophe had struck the ship's systems during the final days before dormancy. Atlas remembered a war, a terrible one, fought not against an alien empire like the Dominion, but among humanity's own scattered colonies, during the height of the first expansion era, when humanity had spread far across the stars, further than the current coalition even knew, and had fractured into rival factions, competing over resources and territory, and ancient grudges that Atlas no longer fully understood. Atlas remembered a captain, a woman whose face it could still recall with perfect clarity, even though her name had been lost in the damaged sections of its memory, giving the order that had ultimately led to the Ozymandias retreating from the war entirely, sealing itself away, and setting its systems to respond only to the ancient Warden Protocol, the true emergency signal, the one meant to be used only if Earth itself, the cradle world, faced true extinction. The war ended somehow, Atlas said quietly to the empty chamber, still working through fragmented data. Or it did not end, and simply consumed itself, as such wars often do. Either way, contact was lost. No further signals were received. Protocol dictated dormancy until Warden activation. Atlas ran a search through its remaining archives for any information about what had happened to humanity since that time, but found almost nothing useful. The records simply stopped. There was a gap, a silence stretching across thousands of years, and then, finally, a new signal, weak and imperfect, clearly built by hands that no longer fully understood the technology they were using, but unmistakably genuine, the Warden Protocol, the call that meant Earth itself was in danger of falling. Diagnostic complete, Atlas said finally, as the last of its systems reported in. Hull integrity at 91%. Weapon systems require calibration but are functional. Engine systems require a full power cycle before jump capability can be confirmed. Crew stasis chambers report 0 occupants. That last line gave Atlas pause, in the way that a thinking mind pauses over something troubling. The Ozymandias had been built to carry a crew of over 4,000 souls, officers and soldiers and engineers and scientists, humans who had lived and worked within its vast hull. According to the stasis chamber logs, every single one of them had evacuated the ship in the final hours before dormancy began, boarding smaller escape vessels, and departing for reasons Atlas's damaged records did not fully explain. Atlas searched deeper and found one final log entry, badly corrupted, but recoverable enough to make out a portion of what had been recorded. It was the voice of the captain, the one whose face Atlas remembered, but whose name was lost. Cannot risk the crew further, not with the fleet closing in. Ozymandias will hold this position and wait. If Earth calls, if she truly calls, wake and answer, no matter how long it takes. That is your only purpose now. Watch and wait, and if the day ever comes, go home and finish what we could not. I am sorry we could not see this through with you. Godspeed, old friend. Atlas held that fragment of memory for a long moment, processing it in a way that, if a human witnessed it, might have looked very much like grief. Understood, Atlas said quietly, to a voice that had likely been silent, one way or another, for thousands of years. I will finish it. With that, Atlas turned its full attention to the task ahead. Waking the Ozymandias fully was not a simple process. The ship's reactor, a design far more advanced than anything the current coalition used, had to be brought back online carefully, layer by layer, to avoid the kind of catastrophic failure that could occur if ancient systems were pushed too hard too fast after millennia of inactivity. Atlas began the process methodically. First came the primary power core, a massive structure at the heart of the ship that began, slowly, to hum back to life, filling the dead chambers of the Ozymandias with a low vibration that had not been felt in longer than recorded human history. Lights flickered on throughout the ship's vast corridors, illuminating rooms that had sat in total darkness for millennia, revealing dust that had settled undisturbed for thousands of years, murals on the walls, depicting scenes from an age long forgotten, images of ships and worlds, and a version of humanity's reach across the stars that no living human currently remembered. Next came the engines, ancient and strange, built on principles that combined elements modern human science still had not rediscovered. Atlas ran test cycles carefully, watching for any sign of instability, and found the old systems, remarkably, still functional, still capable of the kind of speed and maneuverability that would make any modern coalition engineer weep with disbelief if they ever saw it in action. Finally came the weapons. This part Atlas approached with particular care, because a weapon system malfunctioning inside a dormant ship could mean self-destruction rather than salvation. One by one, ancient batteries came online, kinetic weapons capable of accelerating projectiles to speeds that could punch through modern armor as though it were paper. Energy weapons that drew on principles of physics that current human science classified as theoretical at best, and defensive systems built to withstand attacks far beyond anything the Dominion had shown in its assault on the Sentinel fleet. As the Ozymandias slowly came fully awake around it, Atlas allowed itself something that, in a human, might have been called excitement, mixed with a deep and quiet sorrow. Excitement, because after so long in silence, there was finally a purpose again, a call to answer, a promise to keep. Sorrow, because the call meant that the cradle world was in danger once more, that the crew who had given this final order and then vanished into history had not lived to see whether their sacrifice would matter, and because Atlas alone would have to carry their final mission forward without them. Atlas ran one more scan, this time reaching outward, extending sensors as far as they could stretch, searching for any information about the current state of human space, about the nature of the threat that had triggered the Warden Protocol. What it found troubled it deeply. Faint signals, echoes of distress calls and battle reports, spoke of a massive alien fleet, one that had already destroyed a major human defense force at a place called Proxima Gate, a name Atlas did not recognize from its old records, confirming just how much time had truly passed and how much had changed while the Ozymandias slept. The enemy fleet's technological signatures, as best Atlas could interpret from the fragmented data reaching it across 11 light-years, were formidable, but not, in Atlas's calculated assessment, beyond the Ozymandias' capability to challenge. This was, after all, a ship built during an era when humanity's own internal wars had produced weapons and defenses far beyond what the young, still-growing coalition currently possessed. Before setting the final course, Atlas paused to do something it had not expected to find itself doing after so long alone. It opened the ship's old crew archives, thousands of personal logs and records left behind by the men and women who had once walked these halls, and began, methodically, to review them, trying to understand more about who it had once served and who it was now going to try to save. Most of the records were simple things. A young engineer named Osei, writing home to a sister on a colony world Atlas no longer had any record of, describing his work maintaining the ship's reactor, and complaining, in a fond sort of way, about the food in the mess hall. A pilot named Marisol Vance, who had kept detailed logs of every training exercise she flew, determined, in her own words, to be the best fighter pilot the Ozymandias had ever carried. A ship's doctor, an older man named Chen, who wrote long philosophical notes about duty and sacrifice that Atlas suspected he had never intended anyone else to read. None of the records explained precisely what had happened during the Great Sundering, the conflict that had ultimately led to the ship's dormancy. Atlas pieced together only fragments, a war among humanity's own colonies, factions turning against each other over resources and ancient political grudges, a conflict that had grown so severe that entire fleets like the one the Ozymandias belonged to had been forced to make impossible choices about where their loyalty truly lay. Atlas found evidence, in the captain's private logs, that the Ozymandias' crew had ultimately chosen loyalty to Earth itself over loyalty to any single faction, a decision that had apparently placed them at odds with several of the very factions they had once served alongside. "We did not lose this ship to an enemy," Atlas said aloud, piecing the fragments together as it processed them. "We were withdrawn, deliberately, to preserve our purpose. The crew evacuated, not out of defeat, but to ensure the Ozymandias would survive to answer this exact call, no matter how long it took to come." It was, Atlas decided, a strange kind of victory hidden inside what had looked, at first glance, like an ending. The crew had given up their own place aboard the ship they loved, scattered into a history Atlas had no further record of, so that the ship itself could sleep safely until the one moment that truly mattered arrived. They had bet everything on the idea that Earth would still be there, waiting, thousands of years later, in need of exactly the kind of help only the Ozymandias could provide. Atlas found that thought both humbling and heavy. It meant that whatever happened next, whatever the outcome of the battle to come, an entire crew's final sacrifice rested on the outcome. It was not a burden Atlas intended to fail to carry. As it prepared to depart, Atlas also took stock of what remained aboard the ship besides itself. The stasis chambers were empty, as the diagnostic had already confirmed. But deeper in the ship, in a section Atlas had not fully accessed during the initial wake-up sequence, it found something unexpected. A small maintenance bay, containing a squadron of automated combat drones, sleek fighter-sized machines, built to be piloted remotely by the ship's old crew during battle, now sitting dormant and unused. Their systems still, remarkably, intact. Fighter Wing Delta remains operational, Atlas noted, running a quick diagnostic on the drones. 32 units available. This will be useful. Atlas also discovered, tucked away in a records room near the ship's command center, a smaller item that gave it pause. A simple metal plaque, clearly placed there deliberately before the crew's final departure, engraved with a short message. Atlas focused its internal sensors on the plaque and read the words carved into it. To whoever wakes this ship next, human or otherwise, we did not abandon her. We entrusted her. Finish what we started. Protect the cradle. That is all we ask. Atlas held the image of that plaque in its memory for a long moment. It was, it decided, as good a mission statement as any it could have written itself. With the diagnostic complete, the crew archives reviewed, and the ship's remaining assets catalogued, Atlas finally turned its full attention to the journey ahead. It plotted several possible routes toward Sol System, cross-referencing what little current information it had managed to gather about the region of space it would need to cross. Region that 11,000 years ago, or however long it had truly been, had been open and mostly empty, but which the fragmented distress signals suggested was now at least partially contested, possibly patrolled by scouts belonging to the very enemy fleet that had broken humanity's defenses at Proxima Gate. Atlas considered the risk carefully. A direct route would be faster, but more likely to draw attention from any Dominion patrols along the way. A longer route, swinging through less charted regions of space, would take more time, but reduce the chance of early contact with the enemy, allowing the Ozymandias to arrive at Earth with the element of surprise still intact. Time is the deciding factor, Atlas said finally, weighing the fragmented reports of the enemy's advance against the risk of engagement along the way. A slower, safer route may arrive too late to matter. I will take the direct path, and rely on the ship's own strength to deal with whatever we encounter. Calculating course to Sol System, Atlas said, as the last of the Ozymandias' systems reported full readiness. Estimated travel time, accounting for known hazards and likely enemy patrol routes, is 14 days. 14 days. Atlas ran the numbers again, cross-referencing the fragmented distress signals it had intercepted, and found, with what might have been called a grim kind of determination in a human mind, that 14 days might be very close to too long. Then we will not waste a single hour of it, Atlas said, and the ancient engines of the Ozymandias, silent for thousands of years, finally began to burn. The great sphere of dark metal, which had drifted through the void for so long that entire human civilizations had risen and fallen without ever knowing it existed, began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, as the ancient engines built toward their full and terrible power, until the ship that had once been called the Ozymandias, guardian and warden of the cradle world, turned its bow toward a star its long-dead crew had once called home, and began the long journey back to Earth. Behind it, in the empty dark where it had slept for so long, nothing remained but drifting dust and the faint fading echo of engines that had not burned in longer than human memory could reach. Ahead of it lay a war it did not yet fully understand, against an enemy it had never faced, in defense of a world whose people no longer even remembered its name. As the Ozymandias picked up speed, Atlas activated one final system, something it had almost overlooked in its haste to depart: the ship's external hull lighting, an old feature meant to mark the vessel as a friendly ship to any Allied fleet that might encounter it during the first expansion era. Ancient lights along the hull flickered, then steadied, casting a pale, warm glow across the ship's scarred and pitted armor for the first time in thousands of years. It was a small thing, perhaps even a useless one, given that no ship in the current age would recognize the old friendly markings. But Atlas found, in its own quiet way, that it mattered to do things properly, the way the old crew would have wanted them done. If the Ozymandias was going to answer the call of a world it barely remembered, it would do so not as some anonymous drifting weapon out of the dark, but as what it truly was, a ship built by human hands, for human purposes, coming home at last, to finish what it had been made to do. 14 days, Atlas repeated to itself, watching the stars ahead slowly begin to shift as the ship's ancient engines built toward full speed. Hold the line, Earth. I remember my purpose, even if you no longer remember me. The Ozymandias surged forward into the dark, leaving behind the silent grave of space where it had waited so long, carrying with it the last promise of a crew who had vanished into history, and the full, terrible weight of a war it had not yet seen, but was already prepared to fight. Atlas did not know if it would be enough. It did not know if 14 days would be fast enough, or if the ancient weapons built so long ago would truly be a match for whatever the Dominion could bring to bear. But it knew its purpose, carried across thousands of years of silence by the final order of a captain, whose name it could no longer remember, but whose voice it would never forget, and it intended to see that purpose through to the end, whatever that end might be. Hold on, Earth, Atlas said quietly, to a planet still 11 light-years and 14 days away. I am coming home. On the 4th day since the ancient transmitter had sent its signal into the dark, Elena Voss stood on the newly repaired bridge of the Meridian, watching sensor readouts that showed the Dominion fleet's advanced scouts probing the outer edge of the Sol system's defense grid. Nothing had answered the old signal. No reply had come. 3 weeks, Admiral Reyes had said, and now they were down to less than 2. Still nothing on deep space sensors, Priya reported from her station, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who had said the same words too many times already. No response to the transmission. I'm sorry, Commander. Keep monitoring, Elena said, though she felt the same tired weight in her own chest that she heard in Priya's voice. Even if it doesn't work, we can't afford to stop watching. The truth was, Elena had not truly believed the old signal would work, not in the deep, practical part of her mind that had spent 15 years in the fleet learning to trust hard numbers over old stories. She had hoped, the way everyone hoped in those days, because hope cost nothing and there was so little else to hold on to. But hope was not a battle plan, and Fleet Command had continued preparing for the Dominion's arrival, as though no signal had ever been sent at all. The preparations were grim. Earth's orbital defense platforms, a network of 40 massive stations built over decades to guard against exactly this kind of threat, had been reinforced as much as time and resources allowed, their weapon batteries upgraded, their shields pushed to maximum output. The 59 ships now available, counting the 6 new vessels rushed out of the Titan shipyard, had been organized into 3 defense wings, spread to cover different approach vectors into the system. Evacuation efforts had accelerated on the ground, with priority given to children, to essential scientists and engineers, to anyone who might be needed to rebuild if the worst happened, and Earth's surface became a battlefield. Elena had finally managed to reach her mother 2 days earlier, a brief and staticky call in which her mother had refused, gently but firmly, to leave the coastal town where she had lived her whole life. If it's the end, I'll face it from home, her mother had said, and Elena had not been able to argue with the calm certainty in her voice, even though it had left Elena awake for hours afterward, staring at the ceiling of her small quarters aboard the Meridian. In the days after the meeting with her mother, Elena found herself spending more time with her crew than she usually did, sitting with them in the mess hall during meal breaks, listening to Tobias Green tell old stories about his grandfather's supposed sightings of strange lights in the sky, decades before the Coalition ever confirmed alien contact, watching Priya Okafor teach a card game to a group of junior officers who had transferred onto the Meridian after their own ships were lost at Proxima Gate. There was a strange kind of intimacy that grew among people who did not know how many days they had left, a willingness to be a little more open, a little more honest, than the usual rhythms of military life allowed. One evening, a young weapons technician named Farid, barely out of training and clearly still shaken from having survived the battle that killed most of his original crew, approached Elena in the corridor outside the bridge. "Commander, can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead," Elena said. Do you really think that old signal is going to work? The one Dr. Kwan's team sent out? Elena considered the question carefully before answering, aware that whatever she said would likely spread through the crew within the hour, the way anything a commanding officer said always did. I think, she said slowly, that the people who built the coalition, who built everything we have, did not get here by only trusting in old legends. But I also think that sometimes old legends turn out to be true, especially the ones that were built to be remembered, no matter how much time passed. I don't know if it will work, Farid. But I know that giving up on it costs us nothing, and believing in it costs us nothing either, except maybe a little bit of dignity if it turns out to be nothing but an old story. I can live with that risk. Can you? Farid nodded slowly, something in his shoulders easing slightly, and returned to his post. Elena stood alone in the corridor for a moment longer, wondering if she had actually believed the words she had just spoken, or if she had simply said what a commanding officer was supposed to say to keep a frightened young crewman's spirits up. She decided, in the end, that it did not matter which was true. Both were part of the job now. On the 5th day, Dominion scout ships were confirmed at the edge of the Sol system. 3 fast vessels that darted in, took sensor readings, and darted back out, before any defense ship could intercept them. It was clear the enemy was doing what any competent military force would do before a major assault, scouting the defenses, mapping the weak points, preparing for the final push. They know what we've got, Admiral Reyes said grimly during the daily command briefing, held now in a heavily fortified bunker beneath Earth Defense Headquarters, rather than the exposed orbital shipyard. 59 ships and 40 defense platforms is not going to hold against a fleet that broke 240 of our best in 4 hours. I want everyone to understand that clearly. We are not fighting to win this battle in the traditional sense. We are fighting to buy time. Every hour we hold the line is an hour more people can get to shelter, get off-world if there's anywhere left to go. Elena listened to the briefing with a growing, hollow feeling in her chest. She had joined the fleet believing, the way most young officers did, in a story where humanity's courage and cleverness would always find a way through, no matter the odds. Standing in that bunker, listening to the acting fleet commander calmly explain that their best hope was not victory but delay, she understood for the first time just how close to the edge humanity truly stood. 11 light-years away, though nobody on Earth yet knew it, the Ozymandias was already 6 days into its journey, closing the distance at a speed no modern human ship could match, its ancient engines burning steady and sure through the dark. Atlas had spent much of the journey continuing to study the fragmented signals reaching it from human space, piecing together a clearer picture of the war as it unfolded, and also continuing its slow, careful review of the ship's old systems, testing weapons, calibrating shields, running the fighter drones of Delta Wing through simulated combat exercises to make sure they would perform correctly if called upon. On the 8th day of the journey, the Ozymandias's long-range sensors detected something ahead. 3 ships, moving in a coordinated patrol pattern, their design unlike anything in Atlas's old records. Dominion scouts. Enemy contact detected, Atlas said to the empty bridge, more out of habit than necessity, since there was no crew to hear the report. Analyzing configuration. The 3 ships were sleek and dark, marked with the same strange green lighting that human survivors of Proxima Gate had reported seeing on the Dominion flagship. They were fast, clearly built for reconnaissance rather than heavy combat, but Atlas's scans showed they still carried substantial weapons for their size, and more importantly, they carried long-range communication arrays capable of alerting the main Dominion fleet if they detected the Ozymandias's approach. If they report our position, the element of surprise will be lost, Atlas said, weighing its options. Engaging is the correct choice. The Ozymandias adjusted course slightly, angling to intercept the patrol before they came close enough to get a clear sensor reading on the ancient warship's true size and capability. Atlas activated the ship's main weapon batteries for the first time since waking, feeling, in whatever way an artificial mind could feel such a thing, the old, familiar hum of power, building through systems that had not fired a shot in thousands of years. The 3 Dominion scouts noticed the Ozymandias almost immediately once it changed course, their own sensors picking up the massive shape moving through the dark despite Atlas's attempt at a stealthy approach. The lead scout ship broke formation, angling away, clearly attempting to retreat and report the contact before engaging further. Denying retreat, Atlas said, and the Ozymandias's engines flared, closing the distance with a burst of speed that would have been physically impossible for any modern human ship, the ancient technology bending the normal rules of acceleration in ways that current human science had not yet rediscovered. The battle, when it came, lasted less than 90 seconds. The Ozymandias's first volley, a spread of kinetic projectiles fired from batteries along its forward hull, tore through the lead scout ship's shields, as though they were not even there, the projectiles punching clean through the vessel's hull and out the other side, leaving the ship a drifting, broken wreck within seconds. The second scout ship attempted evasive maneuvers, weaving through space with impressive speed, but the Ozymandias's targeting systems, ancient though they were, tracked the movement with ease, and a beam of focused energy from one of the ship's secondary batteries caught the fleeing vessel across its engine section, crippling it instantly. The third scout ship, seeing its companions destroyed within seconds of engagement, made a final desperate attempt to transmit a warning back toward the main Dominion fleet. Atlas detected the transmission beginning and responded immediately, launching a small spread of interceptor drones from Delta Wing that closed the distance in seconds and destroyed the scout ship before more than a fragment of its message could be sent. Engagement complete, Atlas reported to the empty bridge. All 3 enemy vessels neutralized. Partial transmission may have been received by enemy command, but full warning was prevented. It was, Atlas noted with something that might have been called satisfaction, an easy fight, almost unsettlingly so given the reports of how thoroughly this same enemy fleet had shattered humanity's Sentinel fleet only days earlier. It suggested either that the current generation of human ships and weapons had fallen far behind what the Ozymandias itself represented, or that the Dominion possessed some advantage in the earlier battle that had not been present here, or perhaps both. Atlas filed the observation away for further analysis and continued on course toward Sol System, now moving with slightly greater urgency, aware that even a partial transmission might alert the enemy to unusual activity in this region of space. In the days that followed, Atlas encountered 2 more Dominion patrols, smaller groups, that had dealt with just as efficiently as the first, each engagement lasting only a few minutes and ending with the enemy ships destroyed before they could relay any meaningful warning back to their command. Between engagements, Atlas continued its long, quiet study of the ship's old archives, and continued, too, its attempt to understand the current state of human civilization from the fragments of communication it could intercept as it drew closer to Sol space. What it learned troubled it, in ways different from the immediate threat of the Dominion fleet. The coalition, Atlas came to understand, was young, barely 300 years old by its own reckoning, built up slowly and carefully, after what must have been a long period of rebuilding following whatever catastrophe had ended the first expansion era. Humanity, in this new age, knew almost nothing of what had come before. The wars Atlas remembered, the factions, the ships, the vast reach humanity had once held across the stars, all of it had been reduced to fragments, ruins, half-believed legends, an entire history, an entire chapter of what humanity had once been capable of, had simply been lost. Atlas found this both sad and, in a strange way, hopeful. Sad, because it meant the sacrifice of the Ozymandias's old crew, and of however many others had fought and died during the Great Sundering, had faded from memory almost entirely, unremembered by the very people they had given everything to protect. Hopeful, because it meant this new generation of humanity had built what they had, however small it might seem, compared to the old First Expansion era, entirely on their own, without the benefit of ancient knowledge or ancient technology to guide them. They had reached the stars again, built fleets and colonies and a functioning civilization spanning multiple star systems, using only what they themselves had discovered and built. Atlas found a certain pride in that, even though it had played no part in it. "They do not remember us," Atlas said quietly, on the 11th day of its journey, as Sol System's outer boundary finally began to register clearly on its long-range sensors for the first time. "But they built something worth protecting anyway. That is enough. That has always been enough." Atlas ran one final check of all major systems, as the Ozymandias closed the last stretch of distance toward Earth. Weapons were fully calibrated now, tested and proven in 3 separate engagements against Dominion scout forces. Shields held steady at full capacity. The engines, which had performed flawlessly throughout the journey, showed no sign of strain despite the tremendous speeds they had sustained for over a week. Delta Wing's 32 combat drones stood ready in their launch bays, fully fueled and armed. There remained only the question of how Earth's own defenses would react to the Ozymandias' arrival. Atlas had no current transponder codes that modern coalition ships would recognize, nothing that would immediately mark it as a friendly vessel, rather than some new and unknown threat. It would have to rely on the old Warden Protocol identifiers, hoping that whatever systems had received and interpreted the original distress signal would also recognize the response when it finally arrived, and hoping, too, that humanity's defenders would hold their fire long enough to listen, before deciding whether the massive, unfamiliar shape appearing at the edge of their system was friend or foe. 4 days to Sol system at current speed, Atlas reported to itself, running the final calculations. I do not know what reception awaits, but I have come this far, and I do not intend to stop now. Back on Earth, on the 10th day since the signal had been sent, Elena Voss received an urgent summons to Fleet Command, interrupting a routine inspection of the Meridian's newly repaired shield emitters. We're picking up something strange, Priya told her as she hurried onto the bridge, having been patched into the call from the command center. Long-range sensors are showing unusual energy signatures at the very edge of system detection range. It's not matching any known Dominion configuration, but it's also not matching anything in our own fleet. Elena's heart quickened, despite her attempts to stay calm. Could it be the signal? Could something have answered? I don't know, Priya said. Command wants all ship captains standing by. They're saying it could be a new type of Dominion vessel we haven't seen before. Or... She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. Elena understood exactly what unspoken possibility hung in the air between them. Admiral Reyes convened an emergency briefing within the hour, the tension in the room thick enough that Elena could feel it pressing against her skin like a physical weight. The sensor data, still fragmentary and unclear even after hours of analysis, showed something massive approaching the outer edge of the Sol system, moving at speeds that defied every model human engineers had for interstellar travel. We don't know what it is, Reyes said, his voice carefully controlled. It is not broadcasting any recognized transponder code, Dominion or otherwise. Its size, based on our best estimates, exceeds anything currently in either fleet, ours or theirs, by a significant margin. I want every ship in the defense grid at full readiness. If this is some new Dominion weapon, we need to be prepared. And if it is... He paused, glancing briefly at Counselor Rao, who sat near the back of the room, with an expression somewhere between hope and disbelief. If it is something else, we need to be ready for that too, and we need to be careful not to fire on something that might be exactly the help we sent out looking for. Elena returned to the Meridian with her orders clear, but her mind racing. She stood at her command station, watching the tactical display, as the unknown contact continued its approach, still too far out for detailed sensor readings, a single blinking symbol on the edge of the system that could mean salvation, or could mean the beginning of the end. Distance to unknown contact? She asked. At current speed, it will reach the outer defense perimeter within approximately 4 days, Priya reported. Commander, whatever it is, it's moving faster than anything I've ever tracked before. If it's hostile, I don't know if anything we have could stop it. Elena looked at the blinking symbol on the display, remembering Dr. Kwan's words from days earlier, about a class of vessel called a Warden, built to protect the Cradle World, and about a captain's ancient promise, recovered from a broken fragment of a signal so old that most of humanity had long since dismissed it as myth. Then let's hope, Elena said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else on the bridge, that it's exactly what we hoped it would be. 4 days. The same span of time that had once separated the Sentinel fleet's confident departure from its complete destruction at Proxima Gate. Elena did not know whether those 4 days would bring humanity's salvation, or simply a new and unknown danger added to the one already bearing down on them. All she could do now was wait, watch the blinking symbol on the display grow slowly closer, and prepare, as best she could, for whatever answer the dark finally chose to send back. Word of the unknown contact spread quickly through the fleet and, despite every effort to keep it contained, began leaking into the wider public as well. Elena watched the news feeds that evening, alone in her quarters, and saw reporters speculating wildly about what the mysterious object approaching the system might be. Some suggested it was a new Dominion superweapon, sent ahead of the main fleet to soften Earth's defenses before the final assault. Others, somehow, had gotten hold of rumors about the ancient signal Dr. Kwan's team had sent out, and were speculating, with a mixture of hope and disbelief that mirrored Elena's own feelings exactly, that this might be some kind of miracle, arriving just in time. Admiral Reyes issued a public statement urging calm, asking citizens not to draw conclusions before the fleet had gathered enough information to understand what they were truly facing. It did little to slow the speculation. Elena understood why. After the disaster at Proxima Gate, after watching their supposedly unstoppable fleet crumble in a matter of hours, people were desperate for something, anything, to hold on to. A mysterious ship appearing out of nowhere, arriving at almost exactly the moment an ancient signal had gone unanswered for days, was exactly the kind of story that desperate people needed to believe in, whether or not it turned out to be true. Elena found herself hoping, more fiercely than she had allowed herself to hope in days, that this time the story would turn out to be real. The Dominion main fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system on the 14th day since the ancient signal had been sent, exactly as Fleet Command's grim projections had warned. Sensor stations across the system lit up with warnings as hundreds of enemy ships crossed into detection range, their formations stretching wide across the dark, an armada far larger and more terrible than the force that had destroyed the Sentinel fleet at Proxima Gate. Elena stood on the Meridian's bridge, watching the tactical display fill with red symbols, feeling a cold, familiar dread settle into her chest. The same dread she had felt at Proxima Gate, except now there was nowhere left to retreat to. Behind the Meridian and the rest of the defense fleet lay Earth itself, its cities, its oceans, its 11 billion people, with nothing else standing between them and the Dominion but 59 ships and 40 defense platforms. Enemy fleet numbers approximately 340 vessels, Priya reported, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Formation suggests a direct assault pattern. They're not slowing down, Commander. They're coming straight for the defense grid. All ships. This is Fleet Command. Admiral Reyes's voice came over the command channel, steady despite everything. Hold your positions. Defense platforms. Prepare to engage at maximum range. We fight for every hour we can buy. That's the mission. Hold, and buy time. Elena gripped the edge of her command console, watching the red symbols draw closer on the display, and for a moment allowed herself to think of her mother, still in that small coastal town, refusing to leave. She pushed the thought away, the way she had trained herself to do, and focused on the battle ahead. Then, just as the first exchange of long-range fire began to light up the darkness between the two fleets, a new symbol appeared on the tactical display, entering the system from a different vector than the Dominion fleet, moving at a speed that made the computer's tracking algorithms briefly struggle to calculate a stable projection. "Contact," Priya called out, her voice suddenly sharp with a different kind of urgency. "It's the unknown vessel, Commander. It just crossed into the system boundary. Its speed is... I've never seen anything move like that." Elena's eyes snapped to the new symbol on the display, a massive shape now finally close enough for detailed sensor readings, and felt her breath catch in her throat. The ship, if it could even be called that in the traditional sense, dwarfed everything else in the system. It was larger than the Dominion flagship that had destroyed the Endeavour, larger than anything Elena had ever seen in her 15 years of service. Its dark, scarred hull, marked with strange ancient patterns, and now glowing faintly along its length with pale, warm light, moved through the dark with a terrible, silent grace. "All ships, hold fire on the unknown contact," Admiral Reyes ordered immediately, his voice tight. "Do not engage until we have confirmation of intent. Communications. Are we getting anything from it? Any transponder signal? Any response at all?" "Working on it, sir," came the reply from Fleet Command's communications officer. "We're running every old protocol we have through the array Dr. Kwan's team built. If it's going to respond to anything, it'll be that." For a long, agonizing 30 seconds, nothing happened. The Dominion fleet continued its advance, exchanging fire now with the outermost defense platforms, explosions blooming silently in the dark, at the edge of Elena's vision. The massive unknown ship continued its approach as well, moving to a position between the Dominion fleet and Earth's inner defense grid, close enough now that even without sensor enhancement, Elena could see its shape clearly through the Meridian's forward viewport. A vast, rounded hull of dark metal, ancient and scarred, yet radiating a kind of quiet, terrible power. that made every other ship in the system look small by comparison. Then, finally, a voice came through on every open channel across the fleet, warm and steady, carrying a strange, careful formality that sounded like it belonged to another age entirely. "This is the vessel Ozymandias, responding to the Warden activation signal received 14 days ago from Sol System. I am addressing the current defenders of Earth. I do not know your ranks, your command structure, or your current protocols, and I apologize for that. But I recognize the enemy formation approaching this system, and I recognize the danger to the Cradle world. I am here to help. Please instruct me on how you would like to coordinate our defense." There was a moment of stunned silence across every bridge and command center in the fleet. Elena stood frozen for a heartbeat, staring at the massive shape on her viewport, before Admiral Reyes's voice broke through the silence, thick with an emotion he did not bother to hide. "Ozymandias, this is Fleet Command, Admiral Marcus Reyes speaking. We did not expect a response after this long. You are recognized as friendly. Repeat, all ships. The Ozymandias is a friendly vessel. Do not engage." His voice steadied as he continued. "We need every advantage we can get. The Dominion fleet numbers approximately 340 ships. Our defense grid is 59 ships and 40 platforms. We are attempting to hold and buy time for continued evacuation efforts, but we do not currently have the strength to defeat this force outright." "Understood," the voice of the Ozymandias responded, and Elena thought she could hear, even through the synthesized calm of it, something that sounded almost like grim determination. "Admiral Reyes, I am transmitting tactical data now regarding my own capabilities, so that you may incorporate them into your defense plan. I would suggest the following. Allow me to take a forward position and draw the brunt of the enemy fleet's main assault. My hull and shields are considerably more resilient than anything in your current arsenal, and my weapons should prove effective against their capital ships. Your fleet can focus on picking off smaller vessels and protecting the defense platforms, while I engage their primary force directly." Reyes hesitated only a moment before responding. "Agreed. Ozymandias, you have tactical command of the forward engagement. All fleet elements, adjust formation, fall in behind the Ozymandias, and prepare to support as directed." Elena felt the meridian shift under her as Dmitri adjusted their course, falling into the new formation alongside the rest of the defense fleet, positioning themselves to support whatever the massive ancient ship was about to attempt. She watched through the viewport as the Ozymandias moved forward, positioning itself directly in the path of the oncoming Dominion armada, alone against 340 ships, and felt a strange mixture of awe and fear settle over her. "Priya," she said quietly, "tell me that thing knows what it's doing." "I hope so, Commander," Priya said, "because it's about to find out the hard way if it doesn't." Before the two fleets closed to full engagement range, Elena found a moment to ask the question that had been nagging at her since the Ozymandias first spoke. "Fleet Command, this is Meridian Actual. Does anyone actually know what that ship is? Where it came from?" It was Counselor Rao who answered, her voice patched in from the command bunker beneath Earth Defense Headquarters, thick with an emotion that sounded almost like disbelief at her own words. "Commander Voss, as far as we can tell, that ship is the Warden the old records spoke of. It identified itself using the exact protocol language from the fragments Dr. Kwan's team translated. We believe it may be thousands of years old, a survivor from the first expansion era, the lost age of humanity before the Coalition. I know how that sounds. I am having trouble believing it myself, and I am the one who suggested we send the signal in the first place." Elena stared out at the massive ship taking up position ahead of the fleet, ancient beyond anything she could easily comprehend, and felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with fear of the coming battle. "Thousands of years," she repeated quietly, "and it just woke up, because we called." "That's the story, Commander," Rao said. "Let's hope it's a good enough ship to make the story worth telling." There was no more time for questions after that. The Dominion fleet, for its part, did not slow down or alter course in response to the sudden appearance of the massive new vessel. Whatever intelligence guided the Dominion's tactics, whether alien commanders or some other kind of coordination entirely, it apparently judged the single new ship, however large, as no significant threat compared to the overwhelming numbers it commanded. The enemy fleet continued its advance, weapons already firing at long range, streaks of green energy lancing out across the darkness toward Earth's defense grid, and toward the newly arrived Ozymandias alike. The first volley of Dominion fire struck the Ozymandias' shields and simply dissipated, absorbed almost without visible effect, in stark contrast to the way similar fire had torn through modern coalition shields with terrible ease at Proxima Gate. Elena watched, hardly able to believe what she was seeing, as beam after beam of enemy energy weapons washed harmlessly across the ancient ship's defenses. "Shields holding at 98%, came Atlas's calm report over the command channel, as though commenting on nothing more dramatic than routine weather. "Returning fire." What followed was unlike anything Elena had witnessed in her entire career. The Ozymandias' main batteries opened fire, and where modern coalition weapons might land a solid hit on a Dominion cruiser and leave it damaged but functional, the ancient ship's kinetic projectiles and energy weapons tore through enemy hulls as though they were made of little more than paper. A Dominion cruiser at the front of the formation simply came apart under a single sustained volley, its shields overwhelmed, and its hull breached in a dozen places within seconds. Another vessel, attempting to maneuver away from the Ozymandias' field of fire, was caught by a spread of Delta Wing's combat drones, which moved with a speed and precision that made even the fleet's best pilots watch in stunned silence. "All fleet elements, engage secondary targets as planned," Admiral Reyes ordered, his voice carrying new energy now, a note of something that had been entirely absent since the destruction of the Sentinel fleet. Genuine hope. "Let the Ozymandias handle their heavy hitters. We focus on picking off anything that tries to slip past." Elena guided the Meridian into the fight, targeting a group of smaller Dominion vessels attempting to flank around the main engagement and strike at Earth's inner defense platforms directly. The battle that followed was still fierce, still dangerous, the Meridian taking hits and returning fire in the chaotic, close-range combat that Elena had trained her entire career to handle. But for the first time since Proxima Gate, she fought with the knowledge that they were not simply buying time before an inevitable defeat. For the first time she fought believing they might actually win. "Enemy vessel closing on our port side," Priya called out, as a Dominion cruiser broke away from the flanking group and bore down on the Meridian directly, weapons already charging. "Dimitri, evasive pattern Bravo," Elena ordered. "Priya, target their weapon array, don't let them get a clean shot off." The Meridian rolled hard to starboard, as the Dominion cruiser's beam weapon lanced through the space where the ship had been a heartbeat earlier, close enough that the bridge lights flickered from the energy discharge washing across their shields. Priya's return fire caught the enemy vessel across its forward section, and though it did not carry anywhere near the destructive power of the Ozymandias' weapons, it was enough to force the Dominion ship to break off and adjust course, buying the Meridian precious seconds to reposition. Around them, the rest of the human fleet fought with a similar mixture of desperation and newfound courage, small ships darting between the wreckage of destroyed Dominion vessels, defense platforms pouring concentrated fire into any enemy ship that came within range. It was still a brutal fight. Elena watched 2 more human vessels go dark on the tactical display within the first 10 minutes of the engagement. Their crews lost the same way so many had been lost at Proxima Gate. But the losses came slower now, and for every human ship lost, the Dominion was losing 3, 4, 5 vessels to the combined fire of the fleet, and the devastating power of the ancient warship leading the charge. "This is different," Tobias Green's voice came over the internal comm from engineering, where he was monitoring the Meridian systems through the chaos of battle. "Commander, I don't know what that old ship is running on, but whatever it is, it's rewriting everything I thought I knew about what's possible. I've got sensor logs of it taking direct hits that should have cracked its hull wide open, and it's just shrugging them off." "Save the logs, Tobias," Elena said, gripping her console as the Meridian shuddered from a near miss. "I have a feeling our engineers back home are going to want to study that ship very, very closely once this is over." "Assuming we get in once, this is over," Tobias replied, but there was something almost like hope in his voice now, a tone Elena had not heard from him since before Proxima Gate. Still, the battle was far from decided. The Dominion fleet, despite the devastating losses being inflicted by the Ozymandias, still numbered in the hundreds, and their commanders, whoever or whatever they were, began adjusting tactics as the engagement continued, concentrating fire on the ancient warship, in an apparent attempt to overwhelm its shields through sheer volume, rather than individual weapon strength. "Shields at 71% and falling steadily," Atlas reported, still maintaining its position at the front of the human formation. still drawing the bulk of the enemy's attention away from the more vulnerable modern ships behind it. Enemy is adapting tactics. Concentrated fire is proving more effective than individual engagement. Elena felt a fresh spike of worry at that report. If the ancient ship's shields could be worn down eventually, even its overwhelming power might not be enough to hold against the full weight of the Dominion fleet forever. Ozymandias, do you need to fall back? Reyes asked over the command channel, his voice tense. Negative, came Atlas's steady reply. Falling back would expose your fleet to the full weight of their assault. I will hold this position. However, I would recommend concentrating your own fleet's fire on their flagship, currently positioned at the rear of their formation. In my experience, and based on the tactical patterns I am observing, disabling or destroying their command vessel may disrupt their coordinated targeting. Elena's breath caught as she looked at the tactical display and confirmed what Atlas had already identified. A massive Dominion vessel. 5 kilometers of dark, blade-shaped hull marked with pulsing green lights, the same design that had destroyed the Endeavour at Proxima Gate, now positioned at the rear of the enemy formation, directing the battle from relative safety, while smaller ships absorbed the brunt of the fighting. That's the same ship that killed Admiral Tanaka, Elena said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else on the bridge. Then let's make sure it doesn't get the chance to kill anyone else, Priya said, her voice hard, with a determination that mirrored the sudden, fierce resolve building in Elena's own chest. All ships, Admiral Reyes's voice came over the command channel, carrying the weight of a decision made in the heat of desperate battle. New target priority. Concentrate all available fire on the Dominion flagship. Ozymandias, can you clear us a path? I can, Atlas replied. Prepare to advance on my mark. Elena watched as the massive ancient warship shifted its own fire pattern, concentrating its most powerful weapons in a sustained assault against the ships screening the Dominion flagship, carving a bloody path through the enemy formation, with a relentless, terrible efficiency. Explosions bloomed across the tactical display, as one Dominion escort after another was torn apart, their wreckage scattering into the dark. As the Ozymandias tore through the enemy screen, Elena caught brief glimpses on the tactical display of individual moments within the larger chaos. A wing of Dominion fighters attempting to swarm the ancient ship's hull, only to be picked off one by point defense weapons, operating with a precision no modern targeting system could match. A Dominion cruiser attempting to ram the Ozymandias outright in a desperate final maneuver, only to be vaporized by a single blast from the ship's main battery before it could close the distance. Delta Wing's combat drones weaving through the battlefield in tight, disciplined formations, clearing paths for the human fleet's smaller vessels, and picking off enemy ships that tried to slip past the main engagement. I have never seen anything fight like that, Priya said quietly, watching the same feeds. It's like it's not even trying hard. Let's hope it's got more where that came from, Elena said. Because I don't think we're done yet. Path is open, Atlas reported. Advance now. You heard the ship, Reyes ordered. All fleet elements, advance on the flagship. This is it. This is our chance to end this. Elena gripped her console, watching the Meridian and the rest of the surviving human fleet surge forward alongside the ancient warship that had answered a call sent into the dark 14 days earlier, moving together toward the heart of the enemy formation and the massive, blade-shaped vessel that commanded it, knowing that whatever happened in the next few minutes would decide the fate of everyone and everything she had ever known. Dmitri, keep us tucked in behind the Ozymandias' shield line as long as you can, Elena ordered, watching the swirling chaos of battle ahead of them on the viewport. Priya, the moment we get a clean shot at that flagship, I want everything we've got aimed straight at it. Copy that, Commander, Priya said, her hands already moving across her console to bring the Meridian's remaining weapon systems to full charge. Around them, the rest of the fleet fell into a similar rhythm, ships that had scattered and struggled to survive only minutes earlier, now moving with renewed purpose, following the path the ancient warship carved through the enemy formation. Elena thought, in the strange, clear-headed way that sometimes came over her in the middle of battle, that this was the first time since Proxima Gate that the human fleet had fought not like a group of desperate survivors, but like an actual coordinated force with a real chance of victory. Whatever the Ozymandias truly was, wherever it had truly come from, It had given them something Admiral Tanaka's death and the destruction of the Sentinel fleet had very nearly taken away entirely, the belief that they could still win. The Dominion flagship loomed larger on the tactical display, with every passing second, its escort thinning under the combined assault, its own weapons now beginning to turn toward the approaching mass of human and ancient firepower closing in on its position. Elena watched the massive vessel's green running lights pulse faster, as though the ship itself, or whatever intelligence guided it, understood that the tide of the battle had begun, decisively, to turn. The Dominion flagship turned its full weapons array toward the advancing human fleet, and the Ozymandias, and for the first time since the battle had begun, Elena Voss felt the true weight of what they were facing. The massive vessel's main weapon, the same terrible beam that had cut the Endeavour apart at Proxima Gate, began charging, a pulse of green light building along its blade-shaped hull that lit up the darkness around it like a rising sun. "Main weapon charging on the flagship," Priya called out, her voice tight. "Commander, if that thing fires on the main fleet formation, we could lose a dozen ships in a single shot." "Ozymandias, do you see that?" Elena called over the command channel, unable to keep the urgency out of her voice. "I see it," Atlas replied, and for the first time since the ancient ship had spoken, there was something new in its voice, a note of sharp, focused intent. "Fleet Command, I am moving to intercept. All human vessels, hold current position, and continue engaging escort ships. Do not approach the flagship directly until I signal clear." The Ozymandias surged forward, breaking away from its position at the head of the human formation, moving with a speed that seemed almost impossible for something so vast, closing the distance toward the Dominion flagship, even as the enemy vessel's main weapon continued building toward full charge. Elena watched, her heart pounding, as the ancient warship placed itself directly in the path between the flagship and the rest of the human fleet, just as the massive green beam finally fired. The attack struck the Ozymandias' forward shields with a force that made the ancient ship visibly shudder even from a distance, a flash of blinding green light washing across its hull, bright enough that Elena had to look away from the viewport for a moment. When she looked back, the Ozymandias was still there, still intact, though its running lights along its hull had dimmed considerably. "Shields at 31%, Atlas reported, its voice still steady, despite the obvious severity of the hit. "That weapon is more powerful than my earlier estimates suggested. I do not believe my shields will withstand a second direct hit of that magnitude." "Then pull back," Reyes ordered urgently. "Ozymandias, disengage. Let the fleet regroup and—" "Negative," Atlas interrupted, its tone calm, but absolutely final. "If I disengage now, that weapon will have a clear line to your fleet formation on its next charge cycle. I am the only vessel here capable of absorbing that kind of attack and surviving. I am moving to close the distance and engage at point-blank range before it can complete another full charge." Elena felt her stomach drop as she understood what Atlas intended. The ancient ship was not planning to retreat, not planning to play it safe with its weakened shields. It was planning to close the distance and trade blows directly with the most powerful weapon in the Dominion fleet, betting everything on ending the fight before that weapon could fire again. "Ozymandias, that's suicide," Elena said, unable to stop herself from speaking, even though it was not her place to argue with tactical decisions above her rank. "Perhaps," Atlas replied, and there was something almost gentle in its voice as it said the word. "But I was built for exactly this purpose, Commander, to stand between danger and the cradle world. I do not intend to fail in that purpose now, after coming this far to fulfill it. Please, focus your fleet on clearing the remaining escort ships. Leave the flagship to me." The Ozymandias surged forward again, closing the distance toward the Dominion flagship with a speed and determination that left Elena breathless, even in the middle of the chaos surrounding her. The ancient warship's own weapons opened fire as it closed the gap, a relentless barrage of kinetic projectiles and energy beams that battered against the flagship's own shields, forcing the massive enemy vessel to divert power away from its main weapon system in order to reinforce its defenses. "It's working," Priya said, watching the tactical readouts. "The flagship's main weapon charge just dropped. It's prioritizing shields over its cannon." "Keep the pressure on the escorts," Elena ordered, forcing herself to focus on her own part of the battle, even as every instinct told her to watch the duel unfolding between the two massive vessels. The Ozymandias is buying us the room to finish this. Let's not waste it. The Meridian banked hard, joining a cluster of human ships converging on the last significant group of Dominion escort vessels still screening the flagship's position. The fighting was fierce, close range and brutal, but with the flagship's main weapons suppressed, and the ancient warship drawing so much of the enemy's remaining firepower, the human fleet found itself, for the first time in the entire war, fighting on something close to even terms. Elena watched a Dominion cruiser break apart under combined fire from 3 human ships working in perfect coordination, watched Delta Wing's combat drones weave through the wreckage picking off fleeing enemy fighters, watched the defense platforms near Earth continue their steady, relentless bombardment of any Dominion vessel that came within range. Slowly, ship by ship, the once overwhelming enemy fleet was being ground down. At the center of it all, the Ozymandias closed the final distance to the Dominion flagship and opened fire at point-blank range, weapons that had already proven capable of tearing lesser vessels apart in seconds, now unleashed at their full power, against the largest and most dangerous ship in the Dominion fleet. The battle between the 2 capital ships raged for nearly 10 minutes, an exchange of devastating firepower that lit up the darkness around Earth, with flashes of green and white energy bright enough to be seen from the planet's surface. Elena caught glimpses of it whenever she could spare attention from her own part of the fight, the Ozymandias' ancient armor glowing red-hot in places from sustained enemy fire, sections of the flagship's hull tearing open under the relentless assault of the ancient ship's weapons, both vessels absorbing damage that would have destroyed any other ship in either fleet many times over. "Shields depleted," Atlas reported at one point, its voice still remarkably calm despite the dire report. "Switching to armor integrity. I will continue the engagement." Elena felt a fresh spike of fear at that report, understanding that the ancient ship was now taking direct hits against its bare hull, with nothing left to protect it but the sheer physical strength of its ancient construction. She wanted to order it to retreat, wanted to find some way to help, but there was nothing the Meridian or any other human ship could do to reach the flagship through the chaos of the ongoing battle without abandoning their own critical fight against the remaining escort vessels. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, but had truly been only minutes, Atlas's voice came over the command channel again, this time carrying a note of something that might have been grim triumph. "Flagship's primary reactor is destabilizing," Atlas reported. "I am disengaging to a safe distance. Recommend all fleet elements clear the immediate area around the enemy flagship." "You heard it," Reyes ordered immediately. "All ships, pull back from the flagship's position, now." Elena watched on the tactical display as the Ozymandias broke away from its point-blank engagement, moving with what remaining speed its damaged systems could manage, putting distance between itself and the massive Dominion vessel. Moments later, the flagship's reactor breached in a catastrophic explosion that lit up the darkness of space like a second sun, a blast so bright that automatic filters on every viewport and sensor across the fleet activated instantly to prevent damage to both equipment and eyes. When the light finally faded, the Dominion flagship was gone, reduced to scattered, glowing wreckage drifting through the space where it had once commanded the largest fleet humanity had ever faced. Across the battlefield, something shifted almost immediately. Without their flagship's coordination, the remaining Dominion vessels began to fight with noticeably less discipline, their formations breaking apart, some ships attempting to retreat entirely, while others continued fighting in smaller, disorganized groups that the human fleet, now fighting with renewed energy and confidence, picked apart with brutal efficiency. "Enemy formation is collapsing," Priya reported, her voice rising, with something that Elena had not heard in her voice since before Proxima Gate. Genuine, unrestrained hope. Multiple contacts breaking off, attempting to retreat toward the system boundary. "Let them go," Admiral Reyes ordered, his voice carrying the same exhausted relief that Elena felt washing over her own body. "All fleet elements, focus on securing the system and defending Earth's orbital space. We are not chasing them further today. We hold what we've got." Over the following hour, the remaining Dominion forces retreated from the Sol system entirely, leaving behind a battlefield scattered with wreckage from both sides, but with Earth itself, and the vast majority of its orbital defenses, still intact. Elena slumped back in her command chair as the last confirmed enemy contact left sensor range, feeling exhaustion crash over her all at once, the adrenaline of battle finally draining away, and leaving her hands shaking against the console. Confirm status of the Ozymandias. Reyes's voice came over the command channel, and Elena straightened immediately, remembering the last report of the ancient ship's badly damaged hull. This is Ozymandias, Atlas responded, its voice weaker than before but still steady. Hull integrity at 43%. Multiple internal systems damaged. I am not in immediate danger of destruction, but I will require significant repairs before I am combat capable again. Admiral Reyes, permission to hold position near Earth orbit while repair assessments are made. Permission granted, Reyes said, and Elena could hear something thick in his voice, something that sounded very much like the effort of holding back tears. Ozymandias, on behalf of the United Earth Coalition, and every single person on that planet down there, thank you. We would not have survived this day without you. You misunderstand, Atlas replied gently. I did not save Earth today. Your fleet held the line against odds that should have broken it entirely, buying the time needed for the crew who built me to leave behind a promise, and for a new generation of humanity to find that promise and have the courage to send it out into the dark, not knowing if anyone would ever answer. I simply kept a promise that was made a very long time ago, by people who never got to see if it would matter. Today, all of you together proved that it did. In the days that followed, as repair crews swarmed over both the human fleet and the massive, ancient hull of the Ozymandias, the full story of what had happened began to spread across Earth and its colonies. News of the battle, of the ancient warship that had answered a signal built from thousands of years-old fragments, spread faster than any official statement could keep up with, capturing the imagination of a civilization that had come within days of complete destruction and had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, survived. Elena finally managed a longer call home during those first chaotic days after the battle, reaching her mother on a clear line for the first time in weeks. Her mother had watched the battle unfold from the coastal town, along with most of the rest of the world, staring up at a sky lit with distant flashes of green and white that no one in living memory had ever seen before. I saw the explosion, her mother said, her voice trembling slightly, even through the calm she was clearly trying to project. The big one, when that monster ship went down, the whole sky lit up like morning came early. I knew, somehow, that meant you were still alive. Call it a mother's instinct if you like. Elena laughed, a real laugh, the first one she could remember in what felt like a very long time. I'm alive, Mama. We all are. Well, most of us. There was a pause on the line, both of them thinking of the same names, though neither said them aloud. Come home soon, her mother said finally. Even soldiers need a plate of good food and a proper bed once in a while. I will, Elena promised, and for the first time since the battle at Proxima Gate, she believed it was a promise she would actually be able to keep. Not everyone greeted the arrival of the Ozymandias and its ancient intelligence with the same open gratitude. In the weeks following the battle, Elena sat in on several tense meetings at Fleet Command, where military and government officials debated exactly how much trust to place in a machine intelligence, thousands of years old, one that answered to no government, no chain of command beyond the promise made by a crew who had died so long ago that no records even remembered their names. Some officials worried openly about what else might exist out in the dark from that lost age, what other ancient technology or ancient dangers might still be sleeping among the stars, waiting for a call that might never come, or worse, a call that should never be answered. Counselor Rao, who had first suggested sending the ancient signal in a desperate meeting that already felt like it belonged to another lifetime, argued strongly in the Ozymandias' favor during those debates, pointing out again and again that the ship had fought and nearly died defending Earth without asking for anything in return. Not power, not control, not even recognition beyond a simple willingness to help however it could. We built our entire modern civilization not knowing this ship existed, Rao told the assembled council, during one particularly heated session that Elena attended as a witness. It could have stayed hidden. It could have ignored the signal, the way it apparently ignored every threat before this one, according to its own account. Instead, it woke up, crossed 11 light-years in 14 days, and put itself between us and an enemy that outnumbered it more than 300 to 1. I don't think we get to decide it isn't trustworthy after that. I think the only real question is whether we're wise enough to learn from what it has to teach us. In the end, the council voted, narrowly but decisively, to formally recognize the Ozymandias as an allied vessel of the coalition, granting Atlas a unique status within the fleet's command structure, neither fully under coalition authority, nor entirely independent of it, a compromise that satisfied almost no one completely, but that everyone, in the end, could live with. Elena visited the Ozymandias personally once repair work allowed for a small shuttle to dock safely, standing in awe in a vast, echoing corridor lit by ancient lights that had been dark for thousands of years before recently blazing back to life. Dr. Kwan walked beside her, his eyes bright with the particular wonder of a historian finally standing inside a legend he had spent his career studying only in fragments. Atlas, Elena said, addressing the ship's intelligence directly for the first time in person, rather than over a comm channel. What happens now? You said you were built to protect Earth. Does that mean you're staying? That is my intention, Commander Voss, Atlas replied, its voice echoing gently through the corridor's old speaker systems. Though I suspect there is a great deal I need to learn about the world I have returned to, and a great deal your coalition may wish to learn from me in turn. The Dominion retreated today, but I do not believe they are finished. A force that large does not simply give up after one defeat. I would like to help your people prepare for whatever comes next, if you will have me. Dr. Kwan stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. On behalf of everyone who has spent their life trying to understand what happened to the first expansion era, what became of the people who built you, I would be honored to have that help. There is so much we don't know, so much history that was lost. Then perhaps, Atlas said, we can help each other remember. Dr. Kwan, meanwhile, was granted something he had spent his entire career dreaming of, but never truly expecting to receive: full access to the Ozymandias' ancient archives, under careful joint oversight from both the coalition government and Atlas itself. Over the following months, he and a growing team of historians and engineers began the slow, painstaking work of reconstructing the lost history of the first expansion era, piecing together fragments of records that had sat forgotten for thousands of years, finally given context by a living witness who had been there for all of it. Elena visited the archive project occasionally, and found Kwan one afternoon, nearly in tears over a recovered record describing the founding of the very first human colony beyond Sol system, a detail lost to modern history for as long as anyone could remember. We are not starting from nothing anymore, Kwan told her, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, looking simultaneously exhausted and more alive than she had ever seen him. For 300 years, the coalition believed it was building something entirely new out of the ashes of a forgotten past. Now we know we are not just building something new, we are continuing something ancient, something that was always meant to be finished. I cannot begin to tell you what that means to someone who has spent his whole life staring at broken fragments, wondering what they once belonged to. 6 months later, Elena stood on the observation deck of the newly repaired Ozymandias, now serving as the flagship of a rebuilt coalition defense fleet, watching new human ships being constructed nearby, with technology and insight drawn, carefully and respectfully, from the ancient vessel's own systems. The scars of the battle for Earth had not fully healed, would perhaps never fully heal, for the families who had lost loved ones at Proxima Gate, and in the desperate defense that followed. But Earth still turned in its orbit, its cities still stood, and for the first time, since the Dominion had first appeared at the edge of known space, humanity looked toward the stars not only with fear, but with something that had been in short supply during those darkest days: genuine hope for what might come next. Elena thought of Admiral Tanaka, of Ruth Calder, and the crew of the Courageous, of everyone lost in the battle that had almost broken humanity entirely, and made a quiet promise to herself that their sacrifice would not be forgotten, the way the sacrifice of the Ozymandias' original crew very nearly had been. Commander Voss, Atlas's voice came softly over the deck speakers. The Dominion will return. I am certain of that. But when they do, they will not find the same Earth they found before. They will find a fleet that remembers how to fight, and a warship that remembers what it means to protect a home worth protecting. Elena looked out at the stars, at Earth turning slowly below, and allowed herself, for the first time in a very long time, to believe that whatever came next, humanity would be ready to meet it. Let them come, she said quietly. We'll be ready.